I launched a series of videos recently called Let's Talk Engelhard, where we talked about some of the most commonly encountered 1-ounce silver bars from Engelhard, one of the most popular refineries of the 1970s and 1980s. And also the 10-ounce silver bars from Engelhard, like the ones that you see here. And once that video series started to be released, people are asking some fantastic questions, and I'll put a link to that series down below. But one of those questions came from a subscriber who was asking whether or not these older bars have the purity that they state, or was the technology such that the purity maybe wasn't all quite there. So we're going to answer that question in this video. How pure are these older vintage poured silver bars? If you are new to the channel, my name is Dub C, and I want to thank you for being with me here today. Hopefully you'll go ahead and click on that subscription button, become part of this community. Remember, it doesn't cost anything to subscribe to a channel. It's really just a way to show support. And if you're one of my returning subscribers, what's more fun than looking at vintage poured silver bars? One of my favorite things to talk about. This is going to be a fun ride. I think this is going to be a fun journey. I'll take a little bit of extra time and tell you a little bit about these bars as we go through them, and we'll go through pretty quickly before I check them with the Sigma Metalytics verifier here. This question is really interesting. This came from subscriber Brett Roberts, Brett Roberts 3551. He asks, for vintage bars, are there any doubts of the purity? I know the shops have machines that test for silver, but can they identify the exact purity? Some bars listed as 999, but actually 987 or such. This is a great question. This is a question that I've asked myself constantly. And we have maybe a little bit of a bias, right? We're in such an age of technology that we think there's no way that people making silver bars back in the 50s and 60s, or even before that, could possibly have created the purity that we're looking for. So I'm going to hit you with 3 terms as we talk about these. Really one term, and then I'll explain the equipment a little bit. So that first term is millesimal fineness. When we're talking about the purity of gold or silver or platinum, typically we're talking about 999 pure. That's 3 nines pure. There is a reason why the industry went with that level of purity dating back probably 100 years ago, maybe even earlier than that. And it just kind of became the standard that most of us are used to. That 3 nines represents tenths, hundredths, and thousandths, or the purity stated in parts per thousand. And in the case of 3 nines fine, it means 1 part per thousand is not the pure metal that you're looking for. If you took a typical silver round and you cut it into 1,000 different pieces, you can imagine those pieces would be quite small. So imagine that all 999 of those pieces are pure silver, except for that one little piece is something else, copper, nickel, whatever else it is. So you can see that that's probably sufficient for most people's needs. The 3 nines fineness is probably fine, no pun intended, for most purposes that we can think of. Definitely fine for stacking precious metals. I think there's been a push in the last probably 10 or 15 years where people have been looking for 4 nines fine, or even 5 nines fine, or even greater than that. But again, look at it in terms of the parts of this particular item. If you're at 4 nines fine, your tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10 thousandths, or 1 part per 10,000, that is not pure silver. If you're going 5 nines fine, 1 part per 100,000 parts is not pure silver. It gets to be a little bit silly, right? It really is academic. Does it really matter? I've said before that it's very likely that even the modern manufacturers that make 3 nines fine, the products they're putting out are probably closer to 4 nines fine. They just don't want to guarantee it. But I think for all practical purposes, 3 nines fine is fine when you start thinking about it in those terms. There's no reason to go overboard. 3 nines fine is just as much as I would want them to be. Anything more than that borders on gimmick. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the equipment too. We're going to talk about the Sigma. We're going to compare and contrast it with another piece of equipment that has kind of emerged in the last decade called an XRF. So the Sigma, this is made by a company called Metalytics, and technically it's the Metalytics Precious Metal Verifier. What this does is that, and I'm not a physicist, I'm not a scientist, I'll try to give you my best understanding of it. It works by measuring the electromagnetic resistance and density of whatever sample you are testing, whatever item you're testing, if it's a coin, a bar, a piece of jewelry. So it generates a small electromagnetic field, which then induces a current through your sample. And then it compares the resistance of your sample to how it has already seen other samples that are pure, tested, and verified. And it compares and contrasts those to give you almost a yes-no answer. You set the sigma for the default that you want it to have. In this case, we're going to try at 3 nines fine. And if the sigma sees the same kind of resistance in these samples at 3 nines fine, that it knows from its own research that a 3 nines fine object should have, comparing and contrasting those, it'll tell us yes or no. It is 3 nines fine. Hopefully that makes sense. In reality, it works a little bit different from that. I'll talk about that once we start getting there. But that can be compared and contrasted with the XRF. XRF stands for X-ray fluorescence. This is a much more sophisticated piece of equipment with a much bigger price tag. So it works by bombarding your sample, again, this is your bar, your coin, whatever it is, with X-rays. And those X-rays kind of release energy. Every element contained within your sample has kind of different X-rays that it emits now that they are fluoresced, or that these are fluorescent X-rays. And the sigma, or the XRF, has kind of that stored data the same way that the sigma does. By looking at the individual fingerprints of every single element that is throwing off these X-rays, because they all read differently, the XRF can tell you exactly what elements are contained within, and also in what percentage or what amount is contained within your sample. So it is a much more sophisticated answer. Rather than a yes or no, it tells you every single element contained within and how much of that element is contained within your sample. So given the choice between the two, you'd probably want the XRF, but it's important to understand that a sigma, like this one, this is kind of their basic model. I've had this one for many years, runs about $1,000. Those XRFs run anywhere from $5,000 to about $20,000. And there's also a little bit of concern about exposing yourself consistently to X-rays. It's not something that I would want to do all day, every day. But again, I'm not a physicist, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a stacker like you. So we're going to be using a sigma, and I'll show you how it works once we get into this. And again, I'll talk about each one of these bars that we're going to look at. I'll give you a little bit of a better picture of it. I know it's a lot of fun to look at these too, but we're really interested in answering Brett Roberts' question. Are these as pure as they're supposed to be? Unfortunately, I don't have a sigma. I don't have a $15,000 piece of equipment that we're going to compare these to, but an XRF. But the sigma is a very well-known and trusted piece of equipment within the stacking community. And I think it will give us a very solid idea, right, if everything tests the way it's supposed to. So you turn it on, that's how you fire this sucker up. And then we're going to move it up a little bit so you can see it maybe a little bit better. I don't want to have glare there. You have to tell the sigma what you think you are going to be testing. You have to give it that known quantity that it can compare your quantity to. And in this case, we're going to run calcit. That's kind of how you calibrate the system. And you can see that it immediately defaults to gold-pure 3 nines fine. So we're going to skip down through gold and we're going to go to silver. Now, to give this the benefit of the doubt, we're not going to go 4 nines fine because none of these bars indicate that they are 4 nines fine. So we're going to go to the next setting, which is 3 nines fine. Hopefully you can see that okay. Silver at 99.9% pure. So we're going to calibrate it once we've got that setting, and now the sigma is ready to tell us, yes, that meets its requirements, yes, that looks exactly like its known 3 nines fine silver looks, or maybe no, this doesn't look quite right. We're going to start here with this Engelhard, and most of these bars are going to be the old cast or poured style bars. If you did watch the Let's Talk Engelhard series, you know that this is a 7th series bar, and we know that because there's a small space between these two nines. Definitely check out that series if you're interested in a deeper dive. I told you we would take a little bit of a look at these bars just so you can see what they look like. An older cast style bar from Engelhard. Engelhard started in 1902. The 7th series bar like this dates to the late 1970s, early 1980s, a mintage of about 50,000 bars. So you put it on the bullseye that you saw, the little green eye there. And now you can see the readout has these 2 brackets and a cursor, a little box that fits right between these brackets. When we have something at dead center between these 2 cursors, or between these 2 brackets, then we have a very high degree of confidence that this stated 3 nines fine bar is 3 nines fine. That's the way the sigma works. It asks us what we're going to be testing, and then it compares it to what it knows 3 nines resistance to look like. So in this case, I think we are dead on. You may see a little bit of movement within the cursors, within the brackets, but hopefully we don't see anything outside of the brackets. That's really where you have to be concerned. Next up is just a slightly later bar. This is a 10th series bar from Engelhard, and we know that because there is no space between the second and third 9. It is just about the same period of time. It is the same manufacturer. They look quite similar, and in fact in that video I say, to me at least, they are really just varieties or variants of the same type of Engelhard bar. This one took a little bit more convincing. I had to move it around a little bit, and I think even Sigma will agree. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You're not cheating the system by doing that. In this case, the cursor was maybe a little bit off-center, but I could almost kind of sense that there was a little bit to be gained by moving the bar just a little bit. In this case, we are not locked in at the 0 position. I'll mention that again in a second. Quite as much as we were with the 7th series bar, I'm still quite comfortable that this bar is easily 3 nines fine. I talked before about the 0 position. This is a technique that I have used when I have tracked all of the silver bars that I buy. I keep a spreadsheet, a very detailed Excel file that has all the different information that I can find out about the bar, not just when I bought it, how much I paid for it, but also the physical characteristics. And almost every bar that I have, I've tested with the Sigma to see how it reads in the case of the Lydian Hoard, which is where the bulk of these pieces came from. I wanted to study these in as much detail as I could, and that included where it read on the Sigma. A dead center reading on the Sigma, right in the middle of those brackets. I gave that a quantity of 0. I call that the 0 position. Within the brackets, you have 2 positions to the left, you have 2 positions to the right, still within the brackets, but just a little bit off center. So we have 0, and 1 space to the left would be a -1, 2 spaces to the left would be a -2. Back to our 0 reading, 1 space to the right would be a +1, 2 spaces to the right would be a +2. In this case, these both read pretty solid right there at that 0 position, dead smack dab in the middle. This, an 11th series Engelhard silver bar, while it does look quite similar, this is a different manufacturing technique that came a little bit later. I told you we would take a little bit of a look at these as we go through them, and we'll pick up and start going a little bit faster as we get closer. This bar jumped right to that 0 position, no doubt about it, dead center. This is 3 nines fine silver. So it's nice to know, and it's not surprising, that Engelhard, one of the most highly sought after and most solid, reputable refiners of this period, would be producing product that was really dead center when it comes to reading with the Sigma. This is unfortunately a 20-ounce silver bar. This will be the largest bar that we look at. I don't have a 10-ounce poured Johnson Matthey bar. I know a lot of guys out there do. I'm looking for one. I'll get one eventually. But this is made in very similar style to the Engelhard bars that we looked at. Johnson Matthey, Engelhard, kind of competitors of one another. Let's go ahead and try this one. I'm interested to see how this one reads. This one has a little bit of a curved bottom to it, and you want to make sure that the Sigma is in contact with your sample as much as it can be. And again, I have no problem moving the piece around a little bit to try to get a more solid reading. I don't think we're gaming the system at all by doing that. This one had a little bit of flexibility. You can see the cursors bouncing back and forth between the 0 position and the -1 position. I want to stress again, Sigma did not give these 0, -1, -2, +1, +2 readings on this. This is my own technique, and it's really just to see as much information as I could possibly pull from the collection of bars that I have. Is this one a 0 or a -1? There is no negative connotation with the negative numbers. It's just a placement. I would be fine that this is 3 nines fine. I don't think anybody would argue with that. It's solid at a -1, and it's even bouncing to the 0 position. So again, the 2 most well-known manufacturers of silver bars from this period of time. We're talking late 1960s to maybe early 1980s, right in the middle of that zero position of 3 nines fine. We're asking the sigma if they are 3 nines fine. The sigma is telling us, yes, in all likelihood, this is a 3 nines fine product. We're going to go to a series of smaller bars. This one is Star Metals. This is a California company. We're going to see a lot of California companies in this video. Again, these are primarily from the Lydian Hoard of silver bars. This is a second series from Star. The first series is a little bit more crude. I hate to use that word, but it's probably the best way to kind of describe it. So this is what makes these interesting compared to the Engelhard silver bars and the Johnson Matthey silver bars is that a lot of these California manufacturers from this period of time, late 1970s, early 1980s, somebody had to individually weigh each of these bars and then stamp the weight on them. Let's see how the Star Metals reads. Smack dab in the middle. No question at all. The star is exactly where it's supposed to be in that zero position. 3 nines fine, no question about it. Dating to the 1970s, Star Metals bars a little bit more common, but I think they've got an interesting logo, and it makes it kind of a fun thing, maybe for the person that's kind of dipping their toes into the waters of these interesting vintage bars. This is one that I often equate the same way. This is a Hoffman Hoffman bar. We actually don't know that much about Hoffman Hoffman. They continue to make products under a very similar name, and I maintain that it's probably the same company. Into the 1990s, this one has a little bit of evidence of how it was made. You see this curved sprue here. That's what it's called, a pigtail. The molten silver poured into the mold right there. And this one also hand-stamped. Hoffman Hoffman produced a series of very popular silver rounds that feature a unicorn. One of the coolest looking silver rounds, in my opinion. This one immediately wanted to jump to that -1 position. Do we raise any eyebrows? I don't think so. There's a reason that Metalytics provides us those brackets, right? If it's within the brackets, it's probably okay. But maybe it's just a tiny bit less definite that this is 3 nines fine. I would still be comfortable with it at 3 nines fine. Again, if we had an XRF, we could be testing and finding out the entire contents of each of these bars to a certain degree. XRF doesn't measure that deeply. So in some regards, maybe having the resistance, the electromagnetic resistances, may be seen as a little bit better. I don't know. I leave it up to you. It's certainly less expensive. We're going to keep on going. This one is from a company called American Credit. You can see the American Credit name here in the middle. And this is an interesting bar. These are very popular. People seem to really like to collect these ones. These are a little bit harder to find. And this one actually has a counter mark on it, Balthrop and Company. Another company was probably co-branding these or commissioned these to be made by American Credit. The similar manufacturing technique, again, you've got that sprue, that pigtail. You will see that reflected in so many of these bars. A very similar shape, a very similar style, a very similar weight, all in a very similar manufacturing process. Let's see how the American Credit reads. Again, maybe on that -1 position, still well within the brackets. I'd have no problem calling this 99.9. So far, we haven't seen anything that was outside of these. I think we can be comfortable that even though this technology that was being used to refine the silver, and honestly, a lot of these silver bar makers in the 1970s were probably recycling silver from industry like photography. So the fact that they're able to refine the silver from its bare used components into something that is 3 nines fine, remember that 1 part per thousand, I think it's pretty impressive. This is the only example of a JKL bar from the Lydian Hoard. It's been commented on before in the video that this looks very similar to another manufacturer that was of the same era from Berkeley, California, from the 1970s called Drew Refining. The style of font and everything else looks quite similar. The style of the bar, the shape of the bar, not quite as sloped. But again, you can see the evidence of this pigtail having been ground off, a little bit of the unique characteristics that make these old bars interesting. And this one immediately jumped to the +2 position. It is still within the bracket, but you can see how it immediately went 2 positions to the right. This is, I think, going to be one of the most interesting bars in terms of the discussion as to how pure it is of all the bars that we see here today. The fact that it immediately took off and went 2 places to the right, I don't think we can get it outside of the brackets, and that's where you really need to be concerned. In fact, you saw it kind of drifting a little bit more towards the middle there. The JKL bar, isn't that interesting? This is also the heaviest bar from the Lydian Hoard, and again, the only example of this manufacturer. Since we're talking about that, I think it's important to remember that we have exactly one sample of each of these companies. Is that representative? It's important to think when you're looking at a sample of products, the better idea would be to test 5 or 10 or 20 bars from each of these manufacturers. I'm very fortunate that I do have many samples of several of these manufacturers. In the case of the JKL, that's the only bar that I have. This is an International Vaults refining bar. I don't know. What do you think? Does that make these questions and answers? Is it valid? Is it a little bit less valid? Like many of the refineries that we see here in California, and International Vaults is another Californian company, dating from the late 1970s to early 1980s, they eventually ran into financial trouble and legal trouble. This seems to be something that plagued all of these early refiners. This one in particular, they were supposed to be securing unrefined gold and silver way up in Alaska, flying it down to California, refining it, and making money in the process by buying the raw ingredients, if you will, and then coming up with a finished bar. Really neat pouring characteristics of this bar. International Vault's one of the all-time favorites of people who collect this type of silver bar. Let's see where they read. I had to move that one around a little bit because I didn't get it centered on the green eye there, that bullseye. I'm very comfortable that that's at 99.9% pure. International Vaults, a neat company with a neat history, a neat logo. Lots of intrigue around that one. Maybe that's why it's so popular. The next one is a Western States Refinery. This is another California company. This dates from 1975 to 1983. They were based in Fontana, California. And you can see just a little bit of interesting tone on this one. A little bit more of a square bar, but again, we have very similar characteristics to a lot of these bars, all made in a very similar style, a very similar technique. Let's see how the Western States reads. We're a little bit less in the dead center on this one. I would be fine calling this a -1. It went there very quickly. It seems to be staying there. It's not bouncing back and forth. So I think I'm comfortable with this one as a -1. But again, that is not an indication of its actual purity. That's just how the Sigma is reading it. Something about the bar is a little bit different from its known 3/9 fine, but it's not saying that it's not 3/9 fine. I've always said that I think of the Sigma as another pair of eyes. If it tells you, hey, there's something you need to examine a little bit more about this piece, that's when you jump in with your loop, your calipers, your scale, and everything else, and do a little bit of a deeper dive. The JKL reading 2 spaces off, maybe that's the best indication that that one needs to be looked at a little bit closer. The next bar in our group is JJSR. JJSR is J&J Smelting and Refining. Where are they based? Yep, Carlsbad, California, I believe. Somewhere in California, dating to the 1970s. This is another kind of prolific maker. It seems like you can find these pretty easily. Look at that manufacturing. Almost identical, right? Isn't that fascinating? All of these competing companies were making bars in a very, very similar style. We sometimes see this SC countermark. It's been proposed that could be in South Carolina. I've also heard that it could be Southern California. I don't know exactly what the SC countermark means, but let's see where they read. I'm right there smack dab in the middle of our green eye, our bullseye, and we are 1 position off to the left. Again, that I would call a -1 position. But it went there very quickly. It seems to be staying. It's not bouncing around. I'm pretty confident that the JJSR bar is 3/9 fine. Again, so far we're not hitting anything that really is raising an eyebrow. We're going on to another Hoard. This one is actually called the Springfield Hoard, and it starts with this Silvertown bar. We have talked a lot about Silvertown. A lot of my fellow YouTubers have talked about Silvertown. They are a popular manufacturer, still around to this day. They are one of America's oldest refineries dating back to 1949. But this bar, they started making in the early 1970s, and we know that they made 75,000 bars in this series because it has a serial number. And also it has the word fine. Silvertown created a series of bars much later that looks almost identical to this. But most of them don't have a serial number, and instead of spelling out the word fine, it simply has an F period, S period. So the F period, S period bars, much later, we call those retro bars. But this is definitely one of the earlier bars. In fact, Silvertown and Engelhard made co-branded silver dot bars that look quite similar. Silvertown, we're going to try this one. It seems to be dead set at a -1 position on the sigma. Again, I am fine with a -1. I'm fine with a +1. Maybe the -2 or the +2 raises a little bit of an eyebrow. It's the sigma saying, take a closer look at this. But it certainly isn't saying that it's not 3/9 fine. In this case, the Silvertown bar easily within the brackets, no problem. Another bar, and this one is maybe a little bit later, this also from the Springfield Hoard. This is Weschler Manufacturing. Like the Engelhard bars, these ones are stamped with just the weight on them, right? These aren't individually stamped. They were good with just stamping these at 10 troy ounces. And you can see that this bar, even though it looks like an older bar, probably came a little bit later. Once the evolution of consumer silver bars was really starting to take off, you can see that this bar is highly polished and reflective. It's not quite as crude looking. We'll go ahead and put that on the bullseye, and it is dead set at that 0 position, right smack dab in the middle of the brackets. No problem at all with the Weschler Manufacturing Enterprises, maybe a little bit later. Let's call that kind of mid-1980s to maybe even a little bit later in the 1980s. And we're going to go with the TSRC bar. This is a really popular bar. Everybody who sees this bar seems to think that it's really cool. I think this is really cool. Again, a Springfield Hoard bar. TSRC, an interesting company, Tri-State Refining Company. They were launched back in 1973 as Tri-State Refining in Iowa. In 1978, they moved to South Dakota and rebranded themselves as Tri-State Refining Company. So we can kind of date this bar to that period of time because the logo's changed. Tri-State Refining Company. This is what we call a Kit Kat style bar. You can see it's got the pigtail, the sprue also. It's also got this picture frame all the way around the outside. Makes this bar really unique. It's got beautiful tone, original characteristics, just a great bar. I don't know that I remember trying this one with a Sigma. Because of its shape, it may be a little bit tricky. I think I'm fine with that one right in the middle, right? This is a 0 position bar also. So even though we have slightly different forms for these bars, you can say that the Sigma is finding this bar to be 3/9 fine also. No issues with that one. This will be an interesting bar because I know I've tried this one before and it gives me fits when I try to test it with the Sigma. In fact, I might even try to do this with a wand. This is a PMP bar. We don't know very much about PMP, another Springfield Hoard bar. Barely known vintage poured bar, shows a slightly smaller example with the number 913. So this is actually the serial number. It's not the weight of the bar. Mineral Exchanges, one of the best auctioneers when it comes to really cool vintage pieces. They have an example that sold recently that was 1089. So these are clearly of the same series. This one sold in April of 2025. That one, the Mineral Exchanges, 10.73 troy ounces for $385. Mine is bigger. And that's what's really cool about this. You can see the weight of this bar is nearly 13 troy ounces. 3/9 fine is what it says. When you want interesting cooling lines, right? When you want something that's cast and you can really tell how that silver hit the mold and then cooled, this bar's got it all. It's got a little bit of a picture frame. You can see it's not nearly as prominent as it was on the TSRC bar. But because of this bar having that big divot on the back and because of the picture frame holding the bar away from the Sigma, this one's a little bit difficult to read. We'll give it a try. This was my fear with the PMP bar. It's just a little bit too concave, if you will, for the Sigma to get a really good reading on it. We'll try flipping it over. That's a little bit closer. You can see the cursor moved a little bit closer to the brackets, but it's still outside of the brackets. We'll move it around a little bit, and it's jumping all over the place. This illustrates what something that is questionable really looks like. While everything else we've tested so far falls easily within those brackets, even though the JKL, for example, was a little bit further away than everybody else, this PMP bar is really having a hard time. I put it on its edge because this is a flat surface that can really come into contact with that green bullseye, and lo and behold, we get a reading that's within the bracket. We'll try it on the other side and see what happens. Once we have a really good connection between the silver bar and the Sigma, I think our question is answered. This is a 3/9 fine silver bar. It's just got those unique characteristics that makes it really difficult to read. And in this case, I think we're still perfectly fine at 3/9 fine. The fact that Mineral Exchanges would have an example and they were able to sell successfully, the fact that VintagePortBar.com with the other example. These are specialists in the field, and I trust them also. And then I've got one more. This makes 15 different bars, and we'll throw in one bonus at the end. This is a United States Silver Corporation bar. USSC was from Van Nuys, California, right? Established in the 1950s, they are mostly known for their silver art bars. They were one of the most prolific makers of silver art bars. We don't see bullion bars from USSC very often, but you can see this has all of those similar characteristics of many of the other bars that we've looked at, including the pigtail, the sprue that's been ground off. A very interesting bar. This one's got fantastic patina. Let's see how this one reads. This one immediately jumped to the -1 position, still easily within those brackets. The cursor's still there, but it is rock solid. You see no fluctuation. The cursor is not bouncing around. This one I am perfectly fine calling 3/9 fine also. So of the 15 bars that we've tested, actually more than that, since we tested several different examples of Engelhard, with maybe one exception that is a little bit iffy, but even that iffy, and I'm talking about the JKL bar, not the PMP bar, I think we've established that that one is easily 3/9. This is the only example of bars that was a little bit off from where it should be, but it is still within the brackets, right? The cursor is still solidly within the brackets. So the answer to the question, the answer to Brett Roberts' question, how do we know that these bars are all pure? Every single sample that we've tested so far has shown that it is 3/9 fine silver. I have no question about any of them, with maybe a second opinion needed on the JKL bar. Maybe this is the time to bring in that XRF piece of equipment. I did want to throw one more at you. And I've talked about this bar on many occasions. This is a 24 lang, that is a unit of measurement in Southeast Asia. This is a 24 lang silver bar made way back probably between the 1860s and 1880s. This one came from the country of Annam, which now is mostly comprised of what we would call Vietnam, somewhere in Southeast Asia, right? These bars were probably originally made for trade. They're smaller ones that were made in the opium trade. This bar weighs just about a kilogram. This is 922 grams of silver. A kilo would be 1,000 grams. So this is a very, very old silver bar. I just wanted to check and see, can we still use the sigma? Are the bars that are supposed to be pure silver dating back 100, 150 years ago still reading where they're supposed to? And again, we've got to make sure this one comes into contact because of that concave shape on it. This one is reading 3/9 fine. So how about that? These bars were probably made from melted 8 reales, probably the Spanish colonial 8 reales, maybe the Second Mexican Republic or the Mexican Republic 8 reales. This bar dating back all the way to 1870, right? 150 years ago. Is still reading where it's supposed to be on the sigma. So if in probably somewhat crude conditions, right, somewhat less than scientific, absolute pure, sterile conditions, a bar of this age could still be reading within the brackets on the sigma at 3/9 fine with really no question asked, right? That's a +1 position. Then there is a very good likelihood, unless these manufacturers were doing something truly nefarious and trying to cheat the consumers, every single one of these makers was putting out 3/9 fine silver. So it doesn't answer the question, right, necessarily and perfectly. Did every single one of these early manufacturers, 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, did every single bar that they put out always stick to 3/9 fine? I have never encountered one that is off, so much so that I would really want to have it looked at with the XRF, maybe that JKL bar, but I'm pretty confident. Sigma, again, Metalytics put those brackets there for a reason. As long as the cursor is within those, that should be a pretty good indication that it is reading where it's supposed to. But I think this answers the question to at least a small degree. Were these companies able to refine to 1 part per 1,000 for the silver bars they were making? And I think even though we look at the manufacturing process of this and we can see just how crude and labor intensive it probably was, their techniques for making 3-9 fine silver was perfectly fine. I think that answers the question pretty well. What do you think? Do you have other manufacturers that you've tried that you found something different? Do you have one of these manufacturers that you've tried, and is it significantly different? I'd love to hear that comment down below. If you've got questions about anything that we talked about here, by all means leave a question. As you know, I like to say, if you've got a question, there's a good chance somebody else has a question. Let's see if we can answer it for everybody. If you are watching this video on a Friday evening, you are probably watching the premiere of this video. I air new videos pretty much every Friday, and I'm usually there during the premiere to answer questions, to talk with you as everybody is seeing this video for the first time. And if you are watching this premiere on a Friday evening, I'd love to invite you to stick around, because I typically go live immediately after the premiere to do an even deeper dive where we can answer all sorts of interesting questions. We talk about other topics as long as it's related to coins and precious metal. Love to have you join those live streams. It's a great way to kick off the weekend, talk to other people in the community. It's always a good time, and I really enjoy those. Look forward to the live streams every Friday. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, once again, love to have you be a subscriber to the channel. Click on the subscription button, hit the notification button, and it will tell you next time I have a premiere video coming up, and even when I have a live stream coming up. I end my videos by suggestion, and that is the suggestion that you always be learning. And I want to thank you for letting me be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.